Hello. My name is Matt Prewitt. I'm president of RadicalxChange Foundation, and I'm going to talk about how the Plurality Network can collaborate with RadicalxChange. All right, so what is RadicalxChange? RadicalxChange is a global community envisioning and building alternatives to capitalism that do not concentrate power. What we really want to do, what we're really trying to do, is to prove that better systems are possible. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to this work. To me, RadicalxChange is part of a larger arc or a larger project. Before I was doing this, I was an antitrust lawyer or litigator, doing essentially plaintiff side antitrust work. The way that I came to that was out of a concern about power concentration. Basically, a concern about how power begets power in our financial systems, in our technical systems, in our economic systems. But I came to believe that litigating this problem away was not going to work, that that was essentially the wrong vector to address this. And when Web3 started to gain traction around the middle of the last decade, that struck me as very interesting. I thought, this is an opportunity to influence a technical system that might be more important than whatever I might be able to do to bend the arc of United States antitrust doctrine. Furthermore, when the book Radical Markets came out in 2018, an amazing community sprang up around that of people who are interested in applying these kinds of ideas to new technical systems. And that book also, contained really interesting ideas which have been the foundation of a lot of interesting work since then. So in 2018, we started, Glenn and Jennifer Marone and I and a group of others started RadicalxChange Foundation, which is a 501c3 that takes the kinds of big ideas we're talking about today and brings them into contact with real institutions. There are basically three pillars to our work: community, experiments, and building tools, prototypes, and ideas. So I'll tell you about each of them briefly. So first of all, we do events. We put on events around the world, most of which are conducted using open space technology, the kind of attendee-driven convenings that you'll experience a bit of a taste of tomorrow. This is a recent event that we did in Warsaw, Poland. We have chapters around the world, many of which are sort of social meetup groups or groups of intellectual exchange relating to plurality and plurality-adjacent ideas. Some of the chapters are actually sort of full-fledged local activist groups. For example, the Paris chapter next month is hosting a design sprint at a UNICEF conference. And there's lots of other, basically there's lots of people around the world who are interested in this stuff, inside and outside of academia. And there's an amazing network to plug into of like-minded activists and artists and thinkers. We hold monthly calls the first Wednesday of each month where we connect with each other, support each other in our work, and it's sort of an open invitation. The next part of our work is, experiments. So RadicalxChange runs deliberation and decision-making experiments that apply plurality-related ideas to real institutions. So this is very much like, our work is kind of in the joint between the academic ideas that we're talking about here and the reality of institutions. We don't think of ourselves as installing blank slate new systems. We think of ourselves as solving problems within institutional context, within institutional history. So I'll highlight one example quickly. So this last summer, we worked with the Nashville Metro Council on a quadratic voting implementation, essentially. The chair of the finance committee of the city council had the problem of synthesizing the entire 40-member council's ideas about modifications that should be made to the city budget and reporting those back to the mayor. We worked with her to use quadratic voting to prioritize changes to the city budget, and those were then submitted as the recommendations for change. So what this is doing is this is basically a thoughtful sort of feet on the ground type of process of understanding where within existing institutions these kinds of ideas can begin to make a positive difference, and where we can learn about essentially. It's like not exactly move fast and break things. It's more like think carefully and work with real problems and real institutions and responsibly integrate potentially really radical and impactful new ideas into the way that they work. There's a bunch of other amazing work that we're doing, including this year there's going to be a major sort of public-facing quadratic voting operation as part of the New York City participatory budgeting process, and much else that I'm happy to talk about more later. We also build tools that prototype democratic processes and listening at scale. So we have built and maintained, I think, what is sort of the easiest and fastest like light quadratic voting tool, which you can play with at radicalxchange.org. We've also thought about instantiating, building sort of prototypes that instantiate best practices around quadratic voting. So, a quadratic vote is only as good as the options that we're deciding between. There need to be good deliberative processes around it to ensure that it's genuinely useful. So we've built software that kind of instantiates our thinking about how to combine quadratic voting with polis-based deliberative processes, other kinds of facilitated conversations, and other sorts of flexible power sharing arrangements. And again, you can play with it at radicalxchange.org. In addition to that, we are working to advance these kinds of new ideas and institutional practices. So over the past few years, we've done quite influential work, I think, in applying mechanism design related ideas to old problems, such as community currencies, right? Money is one of these institutions that's really ripe for quite a radical re-examination. People have been thinking about it for hundreds of years, but community currencies have never quite taken off. Maybe there are ways that we can apply some of the deep insights that this community is working on to solve the problems that have prevented community currencies from fulfilling their potential. We're also engaged in a big sort of multi-institution research project right now related to property, taking ideas related to partial common ownership, Harburger taxation, things like that, refining them into sort of usable tools, license designs, things like that that can be applied, integrated into institutional settings, and hopefully kind of change a much broader conversation around the way that the institution of property instantiates power sharing. We've also done a lot of work related to information control, shared control over data, related to the international conversation around data trusts, data coalitions, things like that. So how can you get involved? How can you help? One is we are always looking for academic collaboration to help us analyze our work. So we have a higher capacity to actually do experiments and to work in this joint between academia and institutions than we do to actually analyze and process everything we're doing. So for example, the work that we're doing with the New York City Council right now, I think is a really, really ripe opportunity to study how a large group of people interact with quadratic voting for the first time. And we'd love to work with members of this community to ensure that we capture as much valuable data from that practice as we can. We're also always looking for people who run institutions and are willing to try new methods of power sharing, of deliberation, of democratic decision making, and eager for collaborations along those lines. Finally, there's obviously huge amount of intellectual exchange, huge amount of intellectual ferment in this room. with which we consider ourselves eager partners, and would love to hear more about what you all are thinking about plurality and everything we're talking about today. Finally, very useful to have more help building tools, building prototypes, building infrastructure that can help us gather more information about how these kinds of mechanism designs and institutional designs interact with the real world, and how they can help us actually make our world a better, fairer place. That's it. Feel free to reach out to me, and eager to talk more this weekend.